And so back to our look at the Bible verse by verse. Genesis chapter 12 is where the story really begins. But like all great adventures, there is a backstory. Enjoy them at your leisure, or let me summarise them for you here. In episode 1, the Phantom Menace had spoiled God's plans in Eden by tricking Eve into eating the naughty cake. Episode 2, Attack of the Stones, saw Cain beat his brother to death with a rock after being rejected by God. Episode 3, Revenge of the Silt, God showed his dark side by erasing all life from the planet with a flood. And so on to episode 4, A New Hope. The omniscient, omnipotent God has given up any idea of trying to control even a few thousand ape men living on a microscopic rock in a microscopic solar system in a microscopic galaxy lost in the vastness of space. So he decides instead, in his infinite wisdom, to try to cope with just a single individual at a time, one-on-one, mano a godo. We begin at the end of chapter 11 with Abraham's father Terah. I'll call him Abraham throughout, but remember he was Abram until God changed his name. Abram's translated as exalted father. Abraham is father of a multitude. As I stated previously, everything up until now in the Bible is pure mythology, with the exception of Nimrod, who very much appears to be a legendary figure based on one or probably more heroic Mesopotamian rulers, who were combined within the oral tradition in which the early Bible stories have been transmitted for centuries. Abraham, in contrast to Adam and Noah, is a much more rounded figure. It's easy to dismiss him as purely legendary, simply representative of a people's migrating and embracing monotheism. And there is, of course, absolutely no archaeological evidence so far to support his existence, but real or not, there are details in his story which are tantalizing. Back to Terah, his father, for a moment. There's much fleshing out of him within extra-biblical Jewish legends, showing him as an idol worshipper and painting a picture of Abraham as a polytheist who saw the error of his ways. But I do want to stick to the Bible and shall not elaborate here. Hopefully I'll remember to put a reference in the description box. So Abraham was born in Ur, southern Mesopotamia. Haran, Abraham's brother and Lot's father, dies in Ur. Why is that mentioned? Well, it's just one of those little things which flesh out this story and make it appear more than pure legend. It's Abraham's father who takes the extended family out of Ur to live in Haran. Haran has been identified close to Urfa in modern Turkey. In ancient times it was a trading post on the Antioch-Nineveh route, and with access to both the Tigris and Euphrates, it's a likely place for a trader moving north from Ur to settle. Chapter 12 then begins with, apparently, God's first conversation with Abraham, and Abraham doesn't seem surprised by this ejaculation from Yahweh. It's worth reminding ourselves here that when we see Lord on its own, this refers to Yahweh, and the documentary hypothesis suggests these verses were composed in Judah around 950 BCE. However, recently it's been suggested that parts of the J or Yahwist source must have been composed much later, and that possibly different parts of the patriarch's stories were intended to provide evidence of the Holy Covenant applying to certain factions within the Jewish community, both during and following the Babylonian exile. Way too much to get into here. Google documentary hypothesis and start your reading there. So God tells Abraham to leave his country and his father's house. Well, Abraham wasn't in his country and his father was dead. There appears a slight contradiction here with the end of chapter 11, which is thought to be a later P or priestly source. The contradiction could easily be argued away, but I thought I'd mention it. We next have Abraham travelling like a nomad through Canaan, pitching his tent, raising altars and sacrificing animals. And then there's a grievous famine. And this is God's promised land. Abraham, born in the well-watered city of Ur, travelling up the life-giving waters of the two rivers to a place of plenty in Haran, is ordered by God to pack his tent and wander into the unwatered boonies, where the first thing of note that happens is a full-on drought and famine. I mean, it's not as if God is known for being shy when it comes to watering the earth. You would have thought he could have welcomed his new BFF into the promised land with at least a light shower. Anyway, Abraham has to go to Egypt, where the pagan idol worshippers are having no problems with their waterworks. 400 years after the flood and 250 years after the Tower of Babel, pagan Egypt is thriving, more so even than pagan Mesopotamia. It appears that the trick is, if God tells you not to build towers, build loads of them, about 138 discovered in Egypt to date. This defiance of God allowed Egypt to thrive, whilst the Jews argued over which locusts were good to eat. It would seem that God's threats and rewards are only apparent to those who believe in him, a lot like Father Christmas. Abraham is worried that the sexist Egyptians' fondness for embalming will lead them to think that his 70-year-old wife is some hot chick, and so Sarai plays along at being his sister instead. Now, this is a passage that I would guess takes some explaining in certain remote parts of Alabama. Wife? Sister? You mean there's a difference? And it would appear that Abraham then sold his sister-wife into Pharaoh's harem. I say sold because if, as we are led to believe, Pharaoh simply took Sarah, why would he then pay Abraham with loads of sheep, camels, mules, and slaves? God then plagues Pharaoh's house with, wait for it, plagues. Well, what else? Why? Because he's God. Pharaoh done nothing wrong in his book. He paid a fair price for Abraham's chattel. And why is God plaguing Pharaoh now? What about the 400 years of paganism, idol worship and pyramid building? Did he miss that? And if he could inflict Pharaoh with a plague, why not instead not cause a famine in Canaan, with all the death, disease and suffering that must have caused? Or how about letting poor pensioner Sarah get pregnant, so she'll be around to see her grandkids? Ours is not to wonder why, ours is but to pray and die. Of course, there are those who will tell you that all these travails were just part of God testing Abraham. Testing what? What would an omniscient being ever need to test? So Abram leaves Egypt with his ill-gotten gains, including probably Hagar, who we shall hear more about. And he wanders around Canaan, pitching his tent, sacrificing animals, until he realises that this promised land God has given him is actually not even big enough for him and his nephew to live together in. And so they went their separate ways. Abraham to Canaan and Lot to the Jordan Valley. With Lot out of the way, God reappears and tells Abraham that all of the land for as far as he can see would be his. Now I'm guessing that for an 80-year-old, before the days of prescription lenses, as far as he could see was not very far. Perhaps this little fact should be communicated to the Middle East peace talks. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Now I don't know how many people would claim direct descendancy from Abraham, but I would suggest that if God never lies, and this promise is to be fulfilled, then those waiting for Jesus to pop back to earth have a while to wait as yet. Part next will be out soon, and we get to God's covenant with Abraham, otherwise known as Dancing in the Moonlight and all that entrails. Thanks as always for watching, and sincere thanks for your continued support of my channel.